Hi there, I'm Frances Waterman O'Connell, Safe and Inclusive Schools Consultant with the Nova Scotia Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. The title of our session is called The Journey Continues, Preparing for School Through Relationships. I will be presenting along with my colleague Tracy Devereaux. If you reviewed the previous sessions, you would have received some information on trauma-informed care and coping with uncertainty and change, as well as working through your fears. Tracy and I would like to acknowledge that our journey still continues during our current reality with COVID-19. We would like to provide you with some information you can use when navigating through this change. The Back to School plan speaks of wellness for all as a priority. We know the importance of relationships and communication when working together contributes to wellness and well-being. And I would like to say the objectives that we have today. Our objectives are as follows: understanding relational theory, understanding restorative approach, and exploring strategies, practices that support positive well-being in the learning space. When we speak of the importance of connection and inclusion, we are speaking of the ancient history of the Indigenous peoples. The Back to School plan has a focus on understanding the word kinu. Kinu is a Mi'kmaq word that means all of us together. Some of the highlighted pieces on this slide speaks of kinu as meaningful partnerships with all students and their families, reaching out to students, especially those who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and this year's school closures, understanding the gaps in student learning, and also moving forward together and valuing students as a whole. I will now pass it on to Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy Devereaux. I'm the Restorative Approaches in Schools Coordinator for the Restorative Initiatives Unit at the Public Safety Division of the Department of Justice. As we start to think about relationships, I can't help but think to Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou said, "I've learned that people will forget what you did. I will learn that people will forget what you said, but people will never forget how you made them feel." As we start to think about returning to school and that whole concept of relational theory, we think about, in North America, the social factors that contribute to well-being are in decline. There has been a steady decline in nearly all things apart from social media. And at no time in our history has this decline come to a halt the way it has with COVID-19. With COVID-19, social media became the only connection. Increasing social connections in our lives is probably the single easiest way to enhance our well-being. Now's the time that we reestablish those social connections in our classrooms. This part is paramount. For us to be able to have our students come back into these classrooms and be able to reconnect and reestablish those relationships and have that comfort feeling, it's an essential role for us as educators to be able to provide that. Mounting research shows that students who feel connected to school, to teachers, to other students, to school itself, do better academically. Enhancing these connections will bridge the transition to academics. Once we're able to have our students feel connected, feel trusted, feel respected, feel heard in those classrooms, it's then that we're able to reintroduce the concept of the academics and getting back to that part of the work. Relational theory holds that as human beings, we live in and are constituted by relationships. Nothing cements this more for me than the past 13 years when I've worked for the Department of Justice at the Halifax Youth Attendance Centre, working with the 1% of the population that did 90% of the crime. Establishing relationships with those students took a long time. I remember one of my students saying, "Do you think I care if I break into your house or steal your car?" And I said, "How long have you been in this program?" And he said, "I don't know, a year?" I said, "Well, it's been 8 months, yeah." I said, "And it's taken 8 months for you and I to develop enough mutual trust and respect for one another to even start talking about how you're feeling right now. You have never shared that with me before." but now you've chosen to. And it was at that point that I realized, in my position, working with this marginalized community, it was going to take a long time to establish those relationships before we could start affecting change. When we think about that, one of the things that came to me with these students was the fact that together was how it was going to happen. And when I think about togetherness, I can't help but thinking about Ubuntu, the African philosophy of I am who I am because of who you are. There was an anthropologist in Africa who was with some kids, and he'd taken a basket of fruit and said to the children, whoever wins this race will get this basket of fruit at the end. And when he commenced the race, the students locked arms and ran together and then sat there and enjoyed the fruit. So when he questioned it, the student said, I am because we are. So if we think about that in terms of the classrooms, I am who I am as an educator because of who you are as a student. And now I'll pass things over to Frances.
The graphic that we have in front of you is an idea that's adapted from the Golden Circle from Simon Sinek, which speaks of the why, the how, and the what. The why is where we begin, our purpose, the cause, and the belief. It connects to our emotion and decision making. It's very powerful to know your why. The how is understanding the approach or behavior to your why. It's also a connection to our emotion. And the what is understanding the list of action items that we carry through. In this case, in our presentation, the why would be relational theory, the how would be a restorative approach, and the what are the practices that we carry through. We know that relationships matter. Staff to student to student, staff to staff, parent to child to parent, child to child, family to family, and community to community. They are all interchangeable. We need to pay particular attention to how we organize those relationships in schools and at home and its ripple effect. The restorative approach, our how, is the relational principles of practice, which you will learn later on in the session. It is one way of showing our ways of organizing and using the restorative approach, where building relationships, strengthening communications are highly valued. Then we have the practices. This is where the restorative approaches works through our everyday practice. Some examples where we exercise the restorative approaches are through restorative interviews, restorative meetings, community building gatherings, so the share and the learning, decision-making gatherings, reintegration circles, welcome circles, and problem-solving gatherings. I am now passing it on to Tracy that will speak on restorative principles for practice.
As we think about the restorative principles for practice, the one thing that I want to emphasize is these principles are not separate, but rather intertwined and interdependent. So first of all, relationally focused. Relationally focused, understanding and seeking to structures to support just relationships. How do we form a just relationship? Focus on relationships, a way of looking at things to check what is the connectedness. Not focusing on just one individual. Focus on the connections as your mode of analysis, as a way of thinking about what is going on here. This requires paying attention to who are in those relationships, where are they located, how are they embedded, and how are they embodied. We are constantly working towards creating just relationships because things change. Striving to maintain levels of trust and respect, creating safe spaces for students to contribute, share, and learn. As I think about this relationally focused, I think to my time of teaching at the Central Nova Scotia Correctional Facility. I was teaching a communications class, and I had an inmate who was probably 30 years old. And he said, you know, it's pretty bad that I had to come to jail to feel respected in a classroom. As I pondered that, I thought, so how is this young man's school experience, how was it structured in a way that made him feel this way? What were the situations that caused him to feel that he wasn't respected? When we talk about this relationship focused, being relationally focused, it's not just about sharing a relationship with your students. It's about taking that information and showing that that information is being listened to and utilized, so that that information is not just about, oh, we're kind of like friends. No, it's about, this is what's impactful, this is what this student needs to be successful in a learning environment. It's not about being individualistic. It's not about individuals. It's about the overall picture. Comprehensive and holistic, connecting the dots between issues, incidents, contexts, causes and circumstances. Working in integrated ways, not silo and fragmented ways. So we're thinking about things relationally, means starting to map connections, connecting an incident to its context and its causes, or those people involved are connected. If we want to address an issue, what do we want to know? So what happened? So working in these integrated ways and non-siloed. Since 2006, when I worked at the Halifax Youth Attendance Centre, those connections, those silos were an attempt to be broken down. We were a collaboration between justice, education, Department of Community Services, and health through the IWK forensics. And we were able to work in a way that those silos and that fragmentation got broken down, and we were able to focus on that whole child and everything about the aspects in that child's life. That connectedness, making those connections. So in this classroom, we're able to make those connections with those students when they're able to speak to us with those stories, that we're able to connect. Inclusive and participatory, allowing those children to be a part of the developing of those outcomes. When we look at empowering first voice, being trauma-informed, being culturally aware, and needs-based. It's important to be inclusive, to figure out who has been or who is affected, who has been harmed and who is being harmed relationally, who has insights on the issue, who can affect the outcome. We're trying to figure out what needs to come next, who needs to help make things go better in the future. It's important not to just put stakeholders in the room. It's about coming to an agreement, a collective within that room when it happens. So addressing those, knowing the fact that systemic racism exists, failure of care exists. Again, creating a space where first voice is not just welcomed, but listened to and supported. Not just acknowledging the marginalization, but actively working collaboratively to address it. So knowing those situations, we know those circumstances those students are going through, and being able to offer them an opportunity to be heard. Because in many cases, they're just waiting for an opportunity to be asked. They're just waiting for an opportunity to be listened to. And it's our role to give them that opportunity. Looking longer and deeper at why these relationships matter, that isn't just about compliance. More than just feeling heard and included. It's not just simply about feeling heard. It's about what do they need to learn. Allowing them to tell those stories, and then us being the proponents of taking that knowledge and making the adjustments and creating the environment where they have that opportunity to be able to do that. Responsive, contextual and flexible practice, informed by data, still connected, being relational, always going back to the relational. Listening to the needs of our students and responding to those needs. Investigating the data and knowledge that can help affect progress, lasting change to the system, broader systems change as a result. But as we go through this, what do we do with that data? So it's okay to say, yes, I'm restorative in my classroom. How do we know? What do we do with the knowledge that we pick up over the course of the year? How do we analyze that data? What has changed? How have we progressed? That's the part that's important. It's one thing to say, yes, we sit in circles, and that's great. The circle offers an opportunity for that to happen. But utilizing that data, being able to say we are being effective because we're actually seeing change, we're seeing progress, we're seeing development for these children. Focused on individual and collective responsibility, shared responsibility for supporting the students and classroom success. Community values are that protect us all. So creating that environment where there is a sense of this community values, where the student feels they're contributing in terms of what is it that's going to make everyone in this classroom successful. What are the things that are going to allow everyone to be successful? And then being able to look at that. This is not just a plan. This is like a human rights issue. This is literally teachers being an opportunity to allow those students to say, this is how I feel, this is what's wrong, and then taking it and addressing those issues and being able to create an environment where everyone's able to be successful. And that comes with modeling the behavior. That's our role. As educators, that's always been our role. We model the behavior we want to see. We have to be there. We have to support. If we see things that aren't going well for that student, it is our job to interject. It is our job to seek out what that student needs. And that's our role. Collaborative and non-adversarial. There is no us versus them. It's pretty simple. It's we, right? So getting to the root causes and working collaboratively to create outcomes. So how do we as a group, how are we able to have our students be a part of that, to help decide what those outcomes look like and what are the drivers that get us there? And them having that voice, that first voice in there, and knowing that it's acknowledged and knowing that it's heard, that they feel respected in that classroom and have the courage to speak up. And finally, forward focused. We always have to remain forward focused. And when we think about that, I think of the restorative inquiry into the Home for Colored Children and St. Kofa. And St. Kofa is the bird with the feet pointed straight. The bird's head is turned, looking back with an egg in its mouth. And it reminds us that we have to use past knowledge to move forward. We're not going to live there, but we have to know that knowledge to move forward. So we're always looking at what we've done, where we need to make those changes. The purpose is to address either the harms to relationships or things in a relationship or connection that are not going well, or that which we need to sustain and support so that things continue to go well. We are responding. We do need to look back because we care about the context. We need to know what happened, but not to settle on some account or for ascribing blame. It's not about looking back to find that blame. It's about using that knowledge for us to move forward. We look back so that we can ask what happens next, so that we can think about what happens when that does happen, or is it happening? Does it matter what's happening now? It doesn't matter what's happening in the future. So as we think about the importance of focusing, what we want to narrow in on is our students. Around the periphery, we know that the academics and the outcomes and all of that stuff is there. But at this point, we really want to focus in on those students. We want to create an opportunity where they feel listened to. This is an opportunity for us as teachers to be able to show vulnerability. It's an opportunity for us to share the feelings that we had, that we went through this. And hopefully by doing so, it offers up an opportunity for them to feel comfortable, for them to feel trusting that they're able to share how they felt from the experience. I'm now going to pass this on to Frances.
You've already heard the importance of being focused. And being focused on building relationships allows you to be in the present, listen attentively, erase the distraction, if only for a moment. See the person in front of you, that's validating and affirming. Provide clarity for solution-based thinking, and it allows you to have less conflicts. I'm going to read to you the slide that you see on the screen. It says, relational theory has significant implications for our thinking about schooling, moving us from traditional conceptions of schooling to a different way of thinking about schooling. When we look at that slide, what points out is moving from traditional ways of schooling to non-traditional ways of schooling. And we know that all too well, being impacted by COVID-19 since the spring. When we also look at the statement, keep in mind that this includes practices that welcome people in your place of learning first. You start with the center, you get to know the people in front of you, and then you introduce the outside world in. When we look at restorative approaches, there are benefits of using restorative approaches for students, staff, parents, and caregivers. This graphic shows the benefits of using restorative approaches for students, staff, parents, and caregivers. I would like to point out some highlights. All voices are heard. The skill sets of problem solving are evolving. Leadership development happens when using restorative approaches. Gradual release of responsibility for conflict resolution. Reduces stress levels around relationships. Here are some strategies that you can further explore and add to your already existing toolkit. The term before means that you can use these strategies before September the 8th, the return to school. Establishing your goal, and when you establish your goal, you will ask the question, who's going to be affected by this goal, and how are they going to be affected, and the way that we achieve the goal. Creating a safe physical and emotional space is important, not only for you, but of course for your students who will be coming in. Creating a gratitude wall, always looking at the successes that are happening in your classroom and in the school. Keeping that message and sharing with staff that some answers are going to take some time to find. But in the meantime, we can all get started. Maybe welcoming students back before school opens. Could be through a YouTube video, could be a virtual online invite. This lends itself to having maybe a classroom town hall with students to go through their wonders of remote learning. During your time with the students, so when they are into your classroom, build that classroom family bubble. Ask the questions to your students, what does that mean for us? Listen to the stories the students may have and the experiences that they share when they were at home with their family bubble. Make room for everybody. Sharing responsibility and leadership is also key. We also know that you are leaders in the classroom and there's also leaders in the school building. But please be mindful of the little leaders that are in front of you. Access their gifts. Exercise their leadership. Share different ways of communication. We have been following public health guidelines where we are wearing masks and we are practicing social distancing. And when wearing masks, sometimes it is very difficult to understand someone's nonverbal cues. So sharing different ways of communication could start by having a conversation about how do we greet one another. Creating a gratitude wall, again, I know I've said it at the before section, but continue with that gratitude wall even during your time with the students. It is very important that you share with your students that school and home are on the same team. We are there to support the students. We are there to support one another. An extension of the classroom family bubble. Validate feelings in the space and model positive language and behavior. It is very important that we remember that what we do and what we say, students are always watching. Team building, problem-solving activities to promote collective responsibility. Also, take this time to share with even students that some answers take time to find. But we can still get started. This is a great opportunity to practice online lessons in the classroom. You are still covering the outcomes, but you can create a mock lesson that you can be able to determine to your students what it is that you're asking and also get a general feel of how they are navigating through the online lesson right in front of you. This is a great opportunity to also share your plan on how you'll carry out if remote learning happens. Ask students what they will need to make their home and school learning successful. Always absorb the humor when it happens and allowed shared stories to happen in that learning space. And at the end of the day, when you're saying bye to your lovelies, reflect on the gratitude wall. Take the information that you've learned from today, share it with your colleagues, and focus on your next steps. This slide speaks to students having stories. And we know the stories that we were told helped construct our identity. Sharing stories is an important step towards building a relational classroom. Everyone wants to feel like they have been heard and was provided that first voice. They do not need someone to speak for them. This is applicable to students, to educators, and to parents. Listening to stories is key. The benefit of stories, this graphic, also shows what it could look like in a child's mind, as well as our own. The graphic on the left is of a child with a one-track mind. That leaves for a homogeneous way of thinking, little room for exploration and engagement. What we want to strive for is what we see on the right. It's about hearing others' thoughts and experiences through story. That invites exploration, self-initiative to explore, to inquire, to be grateful of the differences that impact a positive society. We also must be mindful of those students or others who come to us that have experienced trauma. And this graphic shows trauma and brain development. When we look at the graphic, we look at that typical development where the cognition is the biggest part of activity in the brain. Then it moves to social and emotional, regulation, and survival. So when a person is not experiencing trauma, survival mode is not at the forefront. When a person is experiencing developmental trauma, the cognition decreases significantly, and what increases is their survival mode. We must pay particular attention to that, and sometimes you will get that through stories from the individual or through communication, whether it be verbal or nonverbal. The key to addressing those individuals who are experiencing the developmental trauma and who are not experiencing developmental trauma, again, is listening. Listening and being relational. Also sharing your own stories and experiences, getting to that level of vulnerability where they can see that you are human too. Being present and genuinely interested. It will lock information that will help you better understand the connection that you have with the people in front of you. When all else fails, be like Siri. When you press that button and you hold it down, Siri says, "What can I help you with?" When you still do not answer, Siri continues to say, "Go ahead, I'm listening." This is something that I feel that we should practice more and more to make those connections for those that may become a little reserved in understanding what it is that you're trying to get from them. It helps create a building of trust. Don't forget to take those small moments of self-care throughout your day. This graphic speaks of 5-minute self-care tips that you can go through on your own and see which one best describes you or you can best connect with. Again, this is something that could be added to your toolkit. Remember, we as educators need time for ourselves to do what makes us happy. So at the end of the day, when you are making that transition from school to home, reward yourself. And however that looks, take time for you as you wind down from a workday. Here are some resources from your respective union to assist you, as well as other resources within our region that can help support you as well. I'd like to thank my co-presenter, Tracy Devereaux, for assisting me throughout this session. I wish you all a year full of positivity and strong, positive relationships that will lead to growth and success. Be well.